Alright, welcome back to Roguetech, and welcome back to your first Roguetech playthrough. So, it's not quite time to drop on our first mission yet, but we have checked the store. The store has a few interesting things, like the advanced optics and the exchanger, that we're holding off on until towards the end of the financial report to make sure that we can actually afford them this early in the game. In engineering, we currently have Mech Bay 2 being worked on. Once it's done, we'll be able to be repairing 2 mechs at the same time. And if we do well in the first mission, one of our mechs will be more damaged than the rest, and we might potentially be able to have them all up and running, even with the Mech Bay 2 working at 50%. However, once Mech Bay 2 is finished, it will only take us 6 days to get it to working at 100%. So, that's all in order. In our mech bay, our bushwhacker will be done in 3 days. We didn't finish the build on the assassin or the hunter, and that's fine, because I would not feel confident dropping the assassin in the state it was before we were going to do anything to it. It just did not have enough armor, and we were likely to lose components, if not the entire mech. So, that's going to sit out. The hunter, or the hornet, we took everything worth taking. We could technically drop it if we needed fodder, but right now we're not really desperate for civils, so we're going to actually wait the 3 days to get the bushwhacker up and running, because it is hands down our best mech, and it will greatly increase our odds on our first mission. The goal is not necessarily to play missions as fast as possible, it's to play missions as efficiently as possible. So, we're going to wait the 3 days for the bushwhacker to be up. Then with the bushwhacker, the stealth, the phoenix hawk, and the locust, we should be in pretty good shape to take on our first challenge. Now, in our barracks, we need to pick out our 4 Mechwarriors, which we already looked through them. And since we're not going to have the training module up before we drop on our first mission, we can go ahead and pick out and skill up the Mechwarriors that we have for that mission, if possible. So, we look at the Tainted Loki. He has the command experience, he has the officer. Dependable is really good early game to help not have them panic out. Mechwarrior, just +1 initiative, is always good, so he is definitely going to be dropping on our first mission. So, we immediately are going to grab the 4 tactics. Getting the bonus to sensor roll is very important, because the no sensors penalty is a -5 accuracy. So it's a +5 difficulty to hit. And we'll get over that once we get in the mission. The accuracy versus difficulty. It's a little bit confusing sometimes, but basically, if you have sensors, the difficulty is increased by 5 to hit. So it's a major blow to your accuracy if you do not have sensors, and tactics helps you get sensors. So, Tainted Loki, we're definitely going to bring. I believe Sarge was the other, yes, command experience officer. Disgraced, again, I'm very fond of it, the bonus ECM shield and probe. So even outside of the electronic warfare systems, you can always consider ECM shield to be a little bit less than a 1%. Bonus, or not 1%, a little bit less than a +1 defense. So ECM shield effectively is a little bit extra defense, not quite a full +1 defense, but a little bit, and it also interfaces with the electronic warfare systems. So she is very much worth dropping. Plus the extra military bonus health does also help with the not punching out as quickly. So we're going to go ahead and skill her up. Again, tactics is the priority. We're going to put gunnery as the second priority. Actually, I say that. We actually do have a mech that can punch. So, if you recall, the stealth here, if we go into it, so the stealth has no weapons in its arms, and it has both lower arm and hand. which means its melee punch is going to be more effective than a mech that doesn't have hands. And it'll still be able to fire all of its weapon systems while punching because they're all torso mounted. So, I think we're actually going to give her 4 piloting and 3 gunnery. Just to get that little bit of extra hit chance, and she'll be the one we drop in the stealth. So we're going to go tactics. Tactics, the no sensors penalty, also will hurt your melee hit chance. So tactics is just de facto the best thing to start with. But once we have the tactics to 4, we're also going to put the piloting to 4. Just to get that extra little bit of hit chance with melee. And we also have the streak system in that mech, so it doesn't really need as much gunnery as other weapon systems. Yes, it's just a streak too, but it is still a streak weapon system, so slightly better hit chance there. So we got her set up now to drop into the stealth. And again, if it didn't have the setup perfect for punching with no weapons in the arms and with all of the weapons torso mounted, I would probably go towards gunnery and just avoid melee because, well, we'll get into melee once we get into the mission. But primarily, just deciding on things for the first mission. We're bringing Tainted Loki and Sarge primarily for the command experience because bonus Lance Resolve is just good, and the bonus Sight and Sensors. So they're definitely in. We have Holdra here, who would be fun to bring, but is 2332. Rusalka here is also 2332. However, Rusalka has Cautious and Jinxed. So she's going to be the one we stick in the 20-tonner. Should be able to make it through the mission without possibly even getting hit. But if she does get hit, hopefully not enough to actually destroy the 20-ton mech. We would like to keep it around as long as possible. It is an acceptable casualty if we lose it, but preferably we'll keep it from getting hit long enough that it'll just soak fire for several missions. And then naturally we'll bring our commander, in part because our commander has the most stats compared to everyone else we have left, and because no matter how high the skill level gets on our commander, it's never going to cost us extra per financial report. So looking ahead a little bit, getting points, getting experience on any of our other Mechwarriors will increase our financial report costs. So very good to drop your commander. So we're just going to be dropping these final 4 on the first mission. And then and we also checked the hiring hall. We would love to pick up Narf for his very, very interesting drop-in reinforcements ability. But again, we're going to wait till closer to the financial report to do that. So, with that all set, all we have left to do is wait the 3 days for the Bushwhacker, and then we can see about looking at the missions that are on offer. Alright. This. The Command Center screen has a lot of information. A lot of information that is very important to pay attention to. So, first off, the different colors literally just means what type of mission it is. So, the red missions are always destroy base. Green mission are always battle, and you can see over here there's also the symbol that each one has. So the color, the symbol, and this word here all together tell you what kind of mission you're looking at. So it's helpful at a glance if you know what you're looking for, but otherwise you can just ignore the colors, you can just ignore the symbol on the portrait. They're not really relevant if you don't know what you're looking for. So, the first thing as a new player that you should be looking at is the difficulty, the skulls. The missions in the mission, in the command center will always be in order from lowest difficulty to highest difficulty. And you can see here we only have 2 half skull missions on offer. Now, half skull missions are going to be quite easy. They're going to be very low risk, but they're also going to have fairly low payout. You'll see these half-skull missions, it's just under 400,000 max pay, just over 500,000 max pay. And max pay is if you go full sea bills with no salvage. And you see you go up to 1 skull and it doubles. So these battles are going to be 1 skull difficulty compared to half skull, but the payout is twice as much. Now, the repair time, if you take damage, you're going to generally have less repair time from a lower difficulty mission, and also less repair cost. But you have to keep in mind the fatigue from your Mechwarriors dropping on a mission is flat. It doesn't matter if it's a 10 skull mission or if it's a half skull mission, your Mechwarriors are going to need about the same amount of time to recuperate. So starting your campaign off with a half skull mission is generally kind of a bad idea. In part because, again, the Mechwarriors are going to need the same amount of recovery time regardless of what kind of mission you drop them on. And also, the bigger reason is because if you drop on a half skull mission, it's not going to give you any actual feedback to how your mech lance is working. It won't really help you identify like what you need to focus on fixing up immediately. So I generally tend to save the half skull missions unless there's just a lot of, if there was like 6 half skull missions to choose from, okay. At that point, yeah, go nuts, drop on half skull missions, get some easy paydays, get the hang of running your mechs around. But in a situation like this, I would prefer to save the half skull missions for if something goes bad and I have to drop on a mission, for example, without the bushwhacker. With the bushwhacker, with the best mechs we have available, a 1 skull mission should not be too difficult. And it's always nice to have the half skull, the lower difficulty missions to fall back on if necessary. Because we should be able, even with just the stock loadouts and with the Hornet having dropped the jump jets, Pharaoh, and Indo, we should be able to drop without the bushwhacker on a half skull mission successfully. But that's something that we'd rather not do unless we need to. So the first thing is, considering that you, of course, are new since this is your first Roguetech playthrough, don't even pay attention to the 1.5 skull. Just ignore 1.5 and above. That's a little bit too much risk for you to take on for your first ever mission of Roguetech. So right now we're basically just looking at these 1 skull missions. Now, before I go through these particular missions and everything that I think about all of them, and every consideration there is for each type of mission, let's just look at one specific mission's information here. So, starting off, obviously the battle, that's just the same as the color, that's the same as the symbol, it just tells you what kind of mission it is. And you can hover over them, whatever you have in your command center. You can hover over the description, and it's a fairly accurate description for most of the different mission types. Battle, stand up, fight. Now, one thing it doesn't tell you is the win conditions. In a battle, the only way you get paid is if you destroy the enemies. If you start losing, the only way you get paid is if you win the battle regardless of the losses. So battles are actually one of the most risky early game missions you can take. Now again, if we're looking in the 1 skull territory, it should be a fairly safe bet. But since you have to destroy the enemies, and that's the only way to succeed, battles can be a little touch and go early game. we'll move on to the rest of the ones available here in a bit. But the next thing to pay attention to on any one given mission is the biome. So this is the Badlands biome. It's a bit hot. So the desert biome, Badlands biome, they generate, or they impact your cooling in a negative way. But again, since our mechs, whenever we were looking at them in the mech bay, are all running cool, we're overcooling everything. We have negative heat deltas across the board, so we can safely drop in a Badlands biome and not worry too much. Which is, again, why we picked this planet, is most of these battles should be, or most of these missions should be in the Badlands biome or desert biome or something like that. And that's kind of why we went here. So, hopefully, the heat will impact your enemies more than it'll impact you. Likewise, if our mechs all ran hot, we would have preferred to have gone to an Arctic world to fight in lower heat environments. This just shows the difficulty rating. Worth noting, I didn't call attention to it whenever I was looking at the travel, but there are actually multiple different colors of skull. The green skulls are the initial half skull, one skull, etc. I believe it goes to orange for the 5.5 to 10 skull missions, and then I think it goes purple, something. It goes all the way up to, I think, 25 skulls, I'm pretty sure it is. So, stick to green. Until you're able to succeed on green 5 skull, you should not be going to any other color other than green skulls. So, that is what that is. Difficulty rating in skulls, always look for the green at the beginning of the game. Down here, we have max pay, max salvage, and max reputation. So, again, what it means by max is if you take no salvage and no bonus reputation, you can get 1.2 million C-bills off of this battle. If you go full salvage and minimal payout, minimum reputation, you'll get 4 priority picks and 19 random. The random, not random, total, that's what it is. 4 priority picks and 19 total. So what that is you pick out 4 from the entire loot chart, you pick 4, and then 15 are randomly added to your loot for the mission. And then max reputation only really comes in once you're trying to, for example, ally with a faction or build up reputation, repair relations with a faction. You can drop on missions and forego salvage and pay in exchange for getting reputation with that faction. That's clearly not something you need to worry about early on. There is, that's something I'll talk about later. That entire max reputation thing, I'll talk about that later. So I'm putting a pin in it. But there is considerations there for more advanced play. However, starting off your first playthrough, ignore it. Just worry about pay and salvage. So, this is the thing that a lot of even more advanced players often forget, is if you actually read the mission description for the mission that you're considering, it will actually tell you more information than just, oh, it's a battle. Darius sometimes will give you a little bit of useful information. For example, in this particular type of battle, he is actually very accurate with facing experienced pilots in elderly mechs and vehicles. So the enemies for this particular type of mission, because he's saying that, it clues you in that they are going to be potentially lower quality, more primitive mechs, potentially aggro mechs. Like, they can be pretty bad mechs. But they are going to have experienced pilots, so their Mechwarriors are going to have much better skills than your starting Mechwarriors. So not only would this battle be challenging because it's a battle and the only way you win is by destroying all the enemies, but it would also be challenging because their Mechwarriors would hit a lot more of their shots than yours would. So even if they're dropping in worse mechs that are in worse repair, that might have broken weapon systems, even if they have less weapon systems, if they're landing their shots more frequently, they might actually win. So, that's one of the things to look for, is to read the mission descriptions and try to get an idea of, is it a more risky than usual contract, or is it a less risky than usual contract? And oftentimes either Darius or the description will be largely fluff, like the local band of brigands, remnants from... This is the part that's important here. Remnants from a local government battalion. So, whenever you're looking at missions, you'll see the symbol next to the mission over here and over here that shows you which faction you're working for. In the mission description, it'll often tell you who you're against, including, and this is the reason I say to pay attention to this instead of the screen I'm about to show you. It will also tell you if there's going to be a third faction that is known prior to the mission. If you know if the briefing tells you there's going to be a third faction, it will often tell you which faction. So it's very important to pay attention. It doesn't take long to read through them, but skipping it completely and not paying any attention to it can sometimes land you into a situation you weren't ready for. And all it took was a couple seconds to read it. So, that is this entire screen, but once you decide on a mission you're interested in, you can then click the negotiate button. And this does not lock you in. You can still click the back button and not take the mission after all. But this lets you see this interface, which tells you your employer, your current reputation with your employer. The higher your reputation, the better the payout, the better the salvage. And also the better prices in the store and hiring hall for any plant or any systems they control. Likewise, the lower your reputation with them, the lower the payout, the lower the salvage, and the higher prices you pay at any system they control to hire or buy things from the shop. So that's what that's for. The target is going to show who you're going to fight primarily. If there's another faction, there could be another faction, whether there was one mentioned or not in the briefing, and that will not be explicitly told to you in this screen. It might be mentioned in the previous screen in the briefing, or you might just know that there's a third faction that will be appearing and have no idea what they will be. In any case, this is the place where a lot of people will actually completely disagree on what the, quote, right answer, or the best practice, or I'm doing a lot of finger quotes that you can't see because this is just a voice. There is no actual wrong answer here. Now, yes, there will be times, especially on very low skull missions, and once you've got a stockpile of equipment, there will be times where you might go for more salvage, or maybe full salvage, get nothing in the loot table that you remotely care about or that is remotely valuable, and just feel bad. Likewise, if you go for mostly money and you have like one priority pick and you see 2 or 3 or more things that you would really love to grab for sure, you might kick yourself a little bit. But considering that we're going against the planetary government, it's very much a coin flip. I did make a guide video of sorts that was like a tier list of factions. That does not apply to the newest factions that were added in 2765, I believe, map. But if you're playing on the 3040 or 3080 map, the factions are all the same as that video, and it applies still very much. Because each faction has their own set of mechs, vehicles, and whatnot, and equipment that they could potentially drop on the field. Planetary government is a complete wild card. They can drop anything from the worst of the worst aggro mechs all the way up to full-blown clan tech loadouts and everything in between. So, planetary government, which is available on every single planet or every single system, will always be the biggest gamble on whether or not the salvage is worth it. It could be absolutely the worst, it could be absolutely the best, and there's no way of knowing until you drop. But, as your first mission, normally, I would say go high on the salvage, specifically because right now, if we lose any weapon systems, it's going to be much easier to just, oh, we lost a laser in the battle, let's grab a laser off the loot screen, instead of having to find a store that has an energy weapon. That said, we know that we want to hire a Mechwarrior that is, I think it was 200,000 between the initial payment and the first financial report, as well as buy an exchanger and an advanced optics. So we really want C-bills for guaranteed value. Like in the store and in the hiring hall, there is guaranteed value. Whereas the salvage here, again, we have no idea what planetary government could drop. So even though we don't have anything and just about anything we get would be better than what we currently are sitting on, I still would say probably look for more C-bills in your first mission, and then get a gauge for how well you did and move on from there. So like, in this particular circumstance, just because, again, because we know there is value in the store, because we know there is value in the hiring hall, that's the only reason why, even against a coin flip like the planetary government, or even against a faction that would be most likely bringing bad stuff like a periphery state or a deep periphery state, usually, generally, for your first mission, going full salvage is a good idea, just to get some baseline level of equipment that you might be able to slap in if necessary. But this is a slightly different situation, just because what we have available for the C-bills if we get the money. Now that said, we're not necessarily dropping on this mission because, again, it's a bit of a concern that we'd be against experienced pilots who would most likely land their shots while we miss. So that's a potentially dangerous choice. Now, moving on, now that we've seen this interface and understand how it works, and if you don't quite understand, or if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I'm more than happy to help. And yes, this entire interface is what we're doing this episode. So, if you get it at this point, I'll see you tomorrow. But moving on into more excruciating detail, you'll see the next battle here, we're working for the planetary government rather than against them. The payout is lower, and part of that is because planetary government generally pays out lower than any of the other factions. You also can't build up reputation with them, so there's no long-term benefit to working for the planetary government. But if that's just the most preferable mission that you have, then it's, a mission that you might want to take. So, aside from the fact that it's working for the planetary government with no reputation gain and less payout, let's look at the actual commander, the actual mission briefing here. So, they're trying to safely transport injured personnel. Satellite surveillance has shown Republican units. So, that, again, is the Republic of the Inner Sphere here. Operating in the region, we're expecting to move our medical convoy through. So, they need us to sweep through and eliminate any Republican units. This does not say the lance of Republican units. This says any Republican units. So, there could be a just primary target unit, which could be, 4 mechs, 5 mechs, what have you, depending on the faction. It could be a secondary lance of 4 or 5, depending on the faction. I actually don't know what the Republic of the Inner Sphere is. It says it's a buffer state, but I'm not familiar. I have not played missions for or against the Republic of the Sphere yet, so I'm not sure if it's a full or if it's just a standard 4-mech or vehicle per lance or what. But anytime you see these missions where you have to clear an area, sweep the area, and eliminate the units, it could be a primary, a secondary, a reinforcements, and if you have, despite my suggestion against it for your first playthrough, if you have support lances enabled, by default, you can have up to 2 support lances. So you could be potentially facing 5 lances in this mission. Now, obviously, with your single lance, most of which are stock equipment, that's bad. That's very bad. And immediately you should be concerned. So, this battle specifically says that is the remnants from a local government battalion. This type of mission where you're destroying the, remnants of a force, generally is a single lance. Usually. Most of the time. These sweep the area ones, there's usually more than 1 lance. And then the last battle that we have at One Skull is here, which is a lance of local government units is engaged in maneuvers within a region we control. So this is a lance, a single lance, doing some kind of combat operation, testing, training, what have you. And the goal, the job, is to hunt down the enemy lance and eliminate it. Now, that does not mean that they are not supported. There could very much be a additional lance of reinforcements whenever you engage them. The only battle we have here that's most likely 99% of the time going to be a single lance is the experienced pilots in elderly mechs vehicles. So that's one consideration. But we don't have only battles here, and as I said, battles are the most risky initial missions you can drop on, since you do have to destroy all the enemies to succeed. The Blackout here, this is a very RNG-based result. So, there's going to be 2 sites. Every Blackout is going to be 2 sites. If you have support lances enabled, any support lances that are going to drop on the mission are going to drop before you activate the first point. So you'll be able to see if there are support lances and how many there are before you even get into the actual mission, which will give you a chance if you decide it's too hot to pull out and withdraw, potentially without taking much damage at all. But if you followed my suggestion during install and setup, then you likely don't have support lances engaged. So it's going to be very straightforward. You'll go travel to the first point, activate it, resolve whatever activates, which I'll get to what can happen in a second, and then travel to the second point, resolve whatever activates, and then you're done with the mission. So the first stage of a Blackout is always one of 3 things. It's either nothing, signs of battle, signs of containment breach, what have you, with no actual threats, nothing to fight, and you just don't have something there and you move on to the second point, and you only have the 1 activation at the final point to worry about. In which case, it's a very easy mission. The second thing that could happen at the first point is turrets could come online. Turrets are stationary, so they have no evasion, and generally, they're pretty low in initiative, so after they activate, you should be able to destroy at least 1, possibly 2, and maybe even all of them before they activate. But there's also a chance that it could be a drop, an ambush, in which case the enemies could drop anywhere around you, including in your back, and they might act before you do. So it can be very dangerous, but if there is an enemy drop, you usually will have turret assistance at the first point. So the first activation generally isn't too terrible. But you still have the second activation after that. So essentially, if you're unlucky, you have a battle with turret support helping you out. Then you have to go on to the second point. When you activate the second point, there's two things it could be with a slight asterisk. So the first thing it could be is a defend base mission, basically. So you arrive, they say, oh, thank goodness you're here, we're under attack, enemies drop, and they charge at you. Your goal is to defend the structures and take down the enemies. So you generally will have turret support there as well, and if you have extreme range, like mortar turrets and things at the first site, they might also be helping you, or arrow turrets or something like that. But you do have to destroy the enemies that drop in that situation, or you don't get paid. The second thing that could happen at the second point, and I know I'm going in depth into this one particular mission type because the blackout is one of the more interesting options. But if you get unlucky, you can have a pretty bad time. If you get really lucky, there's nothing at the first point, you get to the second point, some enemies drop that you can handle alone, and you have turrets helping you, and it's a cakewalk. But the other thing that can happen at the second point is it can be an ambush, where you arrive at the second point and suddenly there are hostile enemies right on top of you. This has two potential extra little bits. One is your allies in the base can manage to get the turrets online, and then the turrets will start helping you with the ambushers. But the other thing that can happen is the turrets can be brought online against you. So then you end up fighting a lance of ambushers and a set of turrets. So depending on how lucky or unlucky you get, a blackout can either be a cakewalk or really rough. So, obviously not a good idea for your first drop, but it is interesting in part because if you do have the turret support helping you out at both stages, especially on low skull missions like a 1 skull or a half skull mission, the turrets themselves might be able to do everything alone, and you can basically miss every shot and still win. So it's interesting. It's just risky. I might drop on it as a second or third or fourth mission, depending on how many we can get in during this financial report, or if there's one available during the next financial report. But for the moment, we want to drop on a mission to see how our mechs perform in the lowest risk, safest way possible. And as I already said, the battles are the most dangerous. The thing that you're, gonna have to guaranteed win a battle at best 1 lance versus 1 lance, and at worst 1 lance versus several lances. The blackout is slightly less risky than that, because even if you do have to fight a lance at each point, you're going to have generally turret support unless you get really unlucky. So it's slightly less. If I want to stress, if you get lucky, because it is also the type of mission that is the most random. There are the most variables that can come into play to either make it easier or harder. But it also has very lucrative payout. You see there, 627. That is the most salvage available for any of the 1 skull missions. So it's very interesting. But what's more interesting is, I'm sure you'll notice, the other 627 max salvage. This is a defend base mission. This is by far the easiest type of mission you can possibly drop on at any given difficulty. Now, sometimes the mission is a little too challenging for the force you drop, but the beautiful thing is, before your mechs start exploding, the enemies will just destroy the buildings, and when the base falls, the mission ends. So, even in the worst case scenario of you're completely outgunned and outclassed and you're going to lose guaranteed, you don't have to withdraw, because the buildings will just go down. And that can actually save you cost, because if you withdraw, your Argo is going to get shot up whenever your dropship's going to swoop in, pick up your lance, and run. But it's going to take damage in the process, and you're going to have to pay for those repairs. Plus, withdrawing is always a bad faith. So there's two fail states for a mission. If you're going to fail a mission, there's two ways it can go. There's the bad faith and the good faith. A bad faith failure is basically you didn't try to do your job well enough. The faction is definitely upset with you. They're not going to pay you. They're not going to give you any salvage. They're very irate. A good faith failure is, for example, if you drop on a defend base, you destroy some of the attackers, but they destroy the base. Depending on how much work you got done, you might get what's called a good faith loss, in which case you still get some payment. It's a partial payment. You don't get the full amount. And you still might get some salvage. Now, that means that you don't have to worry about repairing your Argo. Or not your Argo, your I forget what the dropship's called. But you don't have to worry about repairing the dropship that comes and scoops your people up. The faction isn't as upset with you, and you have a chance to actually still get some salvage and some pay to help with the repair costs, despite the fact that you failed. So the defend base is always going to be the safest and easiest option, especially since some of them will also give you allied forces, allied turrets, etc., and that's always nice. But yeah, the other thing that's nice about the defend base missions, especially the early game ones, is you don't have to destroy anything. You legitimately don't have to destroy a single enemy as long as they fail to destroy the buildings within 10 rounds. So, as long as you can hold out for 10 rounds, you win. Just period. You held out long enough, the allied reinforcements arrive and clear the area, and you win. So it is definitely the best. If you get the option to drop on a defend base, it is definitely the best choice for a first mission. This blue one, on the other hand, this is an assassinate mission. So this is a one skull mission, but it's a one skull assassinate mission, which means in addition to the regular one skull difficulty forces, there's going to be a single target that you have to destroy as the primary objective. Now, reading the briefing will tell you whether it's a heavily guarded weak unit that you have to destroy, or if it's a powerful unit with some supporting forces. And in this particular one, the key figure in the Republican hierarchy that will be relatively unguarded and vulnerable is going to be in something higher tier than a one skull mission normally would have. Now, what that means is both more risk and more reward, because that means it will be generally either higher tonnage or more valuable components than what a one skull mission would normally give you. And you have the added benefit of being able to potentially destroy a single target and then run. Which is why I actually say that an assassinate mission is easier to a degree and less risky to a degree than a battle. Because you can complete the objective by just destroying the primary target and getting gone. And you still get the full pay and the full salvage rights as if you had gone on a battle and destroyed everything. Now, yes, you're going to take, if you run in, destroy one enemy, and then run away, not destroying the rest, you're going to take a lot of return fire. But lucrative salvage rights a higher priority target, a higher value target. Now, if it is the kind where it is a well-guarded whatever, that is the target, that's less valuable, because destroying, for example, a cicada on a 3-skull mission and then running away without taking down any of the support is not going to get you very good salvage. But as long as you read the description, and as long as it is definitely a single, more, powerful individual, they're going to be in something more valuable. So not only are you securing the best salvage by destroying them, but you're also potentially destroying them, getting out, and saving the just damage that you would take for a prolonged fight. For example, 10 rounds defending a base. If you can get in and get out in 5 rounds, just taking down the one target, cool. Easy pay. Now, the defend base is, again, going to be what we go with here. But it is worth noting that this is a VTOL factory. So, again, the description does give you so much information. Darius here is even telling you there's no static weapon emplacements. So the primary benefit, the biggest benefit of a defend-based mission being our first mission, is kind of going to be absent, because generally the thing that makes it easy is you'll have turrets that will destroy the enemies faster than you can usually on your first mission. But this particular defend base doesn't have that. So we might get VTOL assistance, some helicopters helping us. We might not, because that's just the type of defend base it is. Also worth noting, there are defend base missions. In the text, it will say they're being assaulted by an assault mech, which means guaranteed there will be at least one, possibly two, 80 to 100 ton mechs during that mission attacking that base, and thus, if you're standing between them and the base, attacking you. It is very important, especially on the defend base missions, that you read the description and you read what Darius has to say. And if there is if there's an incoming assault mech on a half skull or a 1-skull mission, you need to be fairly confident in your abilities and in your squad, in your units that you're dropping, that you can actually take them down. Or at the very least, not get completely steamrolled by them. Now, even on my playthroughs, there have been times where I've dropped on a defend base, sometimes without reading all the way, and realized it was the type where an assault mech was dropping, and then dealt with it. That's because I have the experience to do that. So make sure you read carefully. The cool thing about those particular missions, I know I'm going on and on at this point, but I already told everyone else they can leave. So this is just me and you time to make sure that you understand the breadth of missions that can be offered within the same type of mission. So one of the benefits of the "oh dear, an assault mech is attacking this base" is that if you get lucky, if the assault mech does get destroyed before the mission ends, and it gets destroyed with a head destruction, the Mechwarrior punching out, whether due to panic or whatnot, or the Mechwarrior falling because of injuries, because you knocked them down enough, or caused them enough headshot, had enough headshots that they didn't resist, or if you destroy them with an engine destruction. There's quite a few different ways that you can end up with a full mech available to salvage. And getting a full assault mech early on can be both a blessing and a curse. Because early on, you do not have the mech tech to really build and maintain and repair an assault mech. You don't really have the skill and the lances built up to drop on valuable enough missions to really make the C-bill pay that you're going to need to maintain and just cover the expense of having an assault mech. So even if you get offered an assault mech early on, if you struggle at all up to that point with the financial management and the out of mission keeping things together, then feel free to salvage the assault mech, but don't build it. Wait to build it until everything else is in a much better state. And that is just a complete tangent and aside about the one type of defend base, or actually it's a couple types. They're just variations of, oh dear, assault mech, what do? So that's just like one little tangent that is very much worth noting. If you are looking and you see, oh, this one's got an assault mech coming, risk versus reward. The reward for fighting an assault mech with allies, if it's the type that doesn't have, like, if it's the type that has base defenses, those turrets might destroy the assault mech on their own, depending on what type of turrets there are, what the placement is, what approach vector the assault mech has, etc. So you might get yourself, at the very least, a few assault mech parts with minimal effort. But you could also end up eating alpha strikes from an assault mech on mechs that cannot survive that at all. So just make sure you're reading the mission briefing. Make sure you read what Darius says, even though sometimes he's less than accurate. There are some missions where he'll say something and it's one of those, you get into the mission and you're just like, oh Darius, oh you poor child. In any case, now that we've looked over our one skull options and we've decided we're going to do the defend base, let's go ahead and go over the other types of mission here. Again, just because everyone else that's wanting to just jump into the mission have already left, so I can spend as long as I would like on this part. Destroy base missions. In a nutshell, your only objective, the only thing that the employer cares about, is these designated buildings fall. If you have enough extreme range and/or indirect fire weapons, you can destroy the base potentially without ever being shot at. Yes, the defenders will attempt to close with you and engage you, but if you can destroy the base in its entirety before they can get to you and then evac out, you can potentially get an easy payday with minimal effort, with minimal risk. But it's kind of one of those things where you have to have the ability to do it. You have to have a lance of mechs that is capable of taking down a base while staying outside of the range or, outside of line of sight of the defenders and the turrets. Because destroy base missions almost always have turrets and a garrison and possibly reinforcements and possibly, there can be a lot of units in a destroy base mission that you're facing off against. But the only thing you have to do to get paid is to destroy the buildings themselves. So it's slightly less dangerous than a battle, in part because most battles can also have just as many units that you weren't expecting, but you have to destroy them all, compared to the destroy base where you only have to destroy the buildings. Then we have, down here, the orange. Another amazingly good early game option is the escort mission, because the convoy that you're escorting, whether it be damaged mechs or vehicles, is almost always going to be better than your starting lance. Or at the very least, on par with your starting lance. So even though this particular mission is a convoy of personnel carriers, what that means is you've got an entire convoy, which is usually 4 units, that can soak damage for you and deal damage on your behalf. That's always helpful. Now, it is, there are certain situations, like, for example, if it's a carrier, so weapons carriers in the Battletech Universe are, let's strip off as much armor as we can get away with, let's go as slow as we need to, but let's put as many weapons on this tank as we possibly can. So if you're escorting a carrier convoy, not a personnel carrier, but a carrier convoy, those things will hit hard, but you're going to have to be careful with positioning, line of sight, indirect fire, etc. to not just have them get destroyed one after another. So the personnel carrier missions are slightly easier than the other potential escort missions, but it's always nice to have that extra allied force to help you. Also, escort missions are broken down into stage 1, either there is a blocking force or there's not. So you fight against a single lance or you don't, depending on whether you get lucky or not. You can activate the point to get the personnel carriers or to get the escort targets on your side at any point before or after destroying any blocking force, but do keep in mind, the second you trigger that point, more enemies are going to arrive. Because there's always 3 forces. Well, not always. There's always 2 forces and sometimes the blocking force at the very beginning. But if there is the blocking force, you are going to face 3 lances of enemies. There's going to be a lance that drops in to try to stop you from getting to the evac point for the carriers, or for the vehicles, or the mechs, whatever you're escorting. And then once you arrive, whether you've dealt with those other 2 lances or not, as soon as you get your escort targets into their evac point, a final lance will drop that will try to destroy them before they get out. And then if they get away, if your escort targets get away, they're going to try to destroy you while you try to get away. But again, just like with the defend base, there's this nice little mechanism to it of, if every escort target you have, if every one of your allied vehicles or mechs or what have you gets destroyed, the mission just ends. So you don't have to worry about taking further losses after losing the mission, like you would if you realize, oh no, this battle's doomed, I need to withdraw, at which point you have to wait for the timer to tick down and then take a lot of damage waiting for it, and then once you do evac, also have to pay to repair your dropship. So escorts definitely up there with one of the safer early game, especially as your first mission. Defend base and escort are definitely the 2 safest. Then we have recovery. Recovery is also a very safe bet, if it's within a skull range that you're comfortable with. Because every recovery, depending on, you can actually read the description, it'll tell you whether there's 1 site or 2. And if there's 1 site to secure and get out, then there will be 1 lance of defenders, and the entire skull value of enemy value will be in that 1 single lance. If there's 2 sites, for example, there's one where you're rescuing a painter and his painting, or rescuing a spy and the data that he stole, or whatever. And it will tell you in the mission whether or not there's 2 points. Now, sometimes there will be a slight variation, like, for example, that spy and the data that they were recovering. You can drop and find out that, oh, the spy's dead. The life monitor's cut off, he's gone, so just get the data. And then it goes from being a 2-point recovery to a single-point recovery. But, yeah, recovery's definitely also up there in the top. I would say, in my opinion, defend base is the easiest, as long as it's not this particular one. Because this particular one is the one where you don't have turrets and you might not even have allied forces at all helping you. But it still does have that safety net of, if the buildings all get destroyed, you lose, but you don't take all the damage yourself. And then escort, I would actually, I'm gonna rescind my previous statement. Recovery is safer, less risky than escort. Just because there's guaranteed to be as many or less enemies. Now, if it's a 2-site recovery, I would say at that point it's safer to go with the escort because, again, you get the allies. But the recovery does have the nice little asterisk at the end of it of, you don't have to fight anyone. You don't have to kill anyone. All you have to do is get into the capture zone and then get to the evac zone. From what I understand, it's no longer really viable, but there have been many times in past campaigns where I built a mech specifically to fly in, whether it be a lamb or a mech with crazy jump jet configurations. I would make it so they could jump in from out of combat, capture the point, and then jump to the evac point without getting shot. Very easy money. You just, in that situation, if you know you're dropping that sort of a loadout, you just don't take any salvage, and you just have a free payday. But from what I understand, that is not necessarily viable or possible anymore. I'll have to see. We'll see how the systems have changed once I actually drop in a mission finally. But recovery is definitely a viable option early game, because while you're fighting, if you decide, oh, this is getting a little hot, I'm taking a little more damage than I'd like, I've lost an arm and a leg, I had to punch out a Mechwarrior, one of my Mechwarriors panicked out, whatever, if something goes wrong, you always have the option of just grabbing the site and getting out. And then target acquisition. Target acquisition really needs speed. If you have adequate speed, if your mechs and vehicles are all sufficiently fast that you can get in, capture 3 separate points before the timer runs out, then get to the evac point and get out, it can be a somewhat easy mission. But there's a little bit of complication there. Because what can happen is you can think you'd be able to get to the capture points in time, but you don't quite. For example, you miscalculated by 1 turn, and you didn't quite make it into that last point before the timer reaches 0. Well, congratulations, you have what's called a kill squad dropping on top of you. A kill squad is a full lance of incredibly high value, incredibly high tonnage mechs. Especially early game, they will wreck you. And then, even if you do activate the first initial points in time, you have to wait around for several rounds before you can actually evac. So if you aren't able to just destroy all of the target, or all of the base defenders very quickly and easily, you are going to be soaking damage as you dance around waiting to be able to evac. And then, if you don't evac fast enough, because, for example, one of your mechs lost a leg and you're just trying to not have to punch them out, another kill team can drop if you don't evac fast enough. So, target acquisitions, if they go super smooth, can be quite easy and straightforward. But if anything goes wrong, it goes very wrong. So, I would argue that even if you have a very speedy team that is very well suited for capturing a lot of points very quickly and dodging bullets, still might not want to take any target acquisitions until you get more used to playing the game. They can be very fun, and once you get better mechs put together with better mech warriors that have higher skills, there will be times where you want to fight the kill team because it's guaranteed to be high value targets. Like, even if you drop on a 7, 8, 9 skull mission, there's no guarantee that every target you fight is going to be high value. There's no guarantee that there's going to be real loot pinatas in a high skull mission. But if you drop on a 1.5, 2 skull mission that's a target acquisition, and you just let the kill teams drop and kill them, they're guaranteed to have extremely high value mechs and equipment. But again, until you get the hang of things, just don't. Or if you do, be ready to reload a save, because if it goes wrong, you will lose everything very quickly. There will be no chance to evac out because the kill team will be able to incinerate your entire lance in an instant. So, that is all the missions on offer here. There is also a mission that is not available called a Destroy Convoy, or Ambush Convoy is what it's called. That, just like Destroy Base, that is going to be a primary set of targets, which is going to be vehicles instead of buildings, that are going to be defended. But the nice thing about the Ambush Convoy is, especially on low skull missions, the convoy is not going to be that impressive. And compared to turrets defending a base, you might have an easier time hitting the convoy and getting out than you would hitting the base and getting out. I would say that if you have generally longer range builds, then the Destroy Base is the easier of those two. And if you have shorter range builds that are higher mobility, then the Ambush Convoy is going to be the easier between those two. But I would definitely say Ambush Convoy and Destroy Base are like the middle ground between the, easier, safer bets like recoveries and escorts and defend bases, and the harder ones like blackouts or target acquisitions or battles. And the assassinate is very much RNG, and it depends on which exact assassination mission it is. But I would definitely say it's harder than the recovery, defend base, and escort. If it's the kind where you're just destroying a soft target, like a cicada that's heavily defended, that's actually going to be harder than the Destroy Base or Ambush Convoy, because the defenders that are defending that soft target are going to be more impressive than the turrets or the convoy or the defenders of the base or the convoy. So in that situation, it's harder than and riskier than the Destroy Base or Ambush Convoy. But if it's this kind where it's a relatively unguarded and vulnerable target, and that target is just in a higher value than normal mech or vehicle, that actually makes it a little bit easier than the Destroy Base or Ambush Convoy, because once you take down that primary target, that's most of the potential damage off the field as well. So you can either finish off the rest or evac out in relative safety, whereas the Destroy Base and the Ambush Convoy is each going to have at least 4 targets. Actually, I think Destroy Base could be 3 targets, but I think it's minimum of destroy 3 buildings. Then again, I think there are a couple that are just destroy. In any case, there's more than one is my point. So destroying the base, you're going to have more hit points to shred through generally, and the Ambush Convoy, you're definitely going to have more units to shred through that, if there's a hover tank, might be a lot harder to hit than just the single high value mech. But again, primarily to get a feel for how our mechs function, to get a feel for how our Mechwarriors perform, and to get a feel for roughly what we're capable of, we're going to drop on this defend base mission, and we're going to hopefully have some VTOLs helping us, but otherwise we're going to have the structures soaking damage on our behalf as we fight, and I'll be able to go into very, very deep detail of a lot of combat systems, as well as how to handle defend-based missions specifically over the next couple videos. That's right, this first battle will be split into multiple videos. But for now, that's been your episode of Roguetech for the day. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, have a good one.